Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
We are diving deep, and I mean millions of years deep, into the real story of human health and what it means for aging vibrantly today.
Right.
We're not here to talk about the latest diet fad. This is the absolute longest view of the human body you can get. We're tracing our evolution from our earliest ancestors 4 million years ago, right up to this very moment.
And this is not just a history lesson. You've brought us just a remarkable stack of sources.
It's an incredible collection.
It's a true archaeological and evolutionary review. We have papers on ancient human biology, the massive shift to agriculture, and what I find most fascinating, these CT scans of Egyptian mummies.
Yeah, the mummy scans are a game changer.
They are. And all this material is a direct challenge to how we think about modern health, about longevity, and especially about disease.
It really is. And the core of our mission today is to provide some real context for your health choices.
Yeah.
Especially if you're someone focused on maintaining your strength, your mobility, and your cognitive health as you get older. We so often blame modern life, right? The refined sugar, the desk jobs, the stress.
All of it.
For chronic conditions like heart disease, diabetes, osteoporosis. But the big question we're asking is, how far back do these struggles actually go?
Were our Stone Age ancestors really healthier than us?
Exactly. And if they were, what critical lessons can we apply today for, better aging, for stronger bones, and for a more vibrant life?
Well, we're going to be specifically examining this concept that researchers call evolutionary mismatch.
Okay, what is that exactly?
It's this fundamental conflict. You have our ancient genetic design, our hardware, which was honed over millions of years of really rigorous natural selection.
Right, built for a certain world.
And then suddenly, that hardware confronts the drastically different modern world we've built with diets and activity levels we've only adopted in the last few thousand years. It's a tiny fraction of our history.
A blink of an eye.
We're going to trace how two massive pivots in human history. First, the reliance on meat, and then the shift to agriculture, how they fundamentally changed our biology, and sometimes for the worse.
And what's so fascinating here, what really jumps out from the sources, is that the evidence is literally written in our bones, in the fossil record.
You can see it.
You can see it. We're discovering the deep, deep roots of diseases that we once thought were exclusively modern. The bones, the teeth, even the calcified arteries of people who lived millennia ago tell this continuous story of adaptation, of trade-offs, and of vulnerability. So let's start at the beginning. What makes us distinctly human? It's our huge, energy-hungry brain.
The defining feature.
And our sources point out that human brain volume didn't just grow steadily. It basically exploded over a relatively short evolutionary time frame.
Right.
It peaked around 100,000 years ago, reaching volumes up to 1,500 milliliters. I mean, that is a massive piece of computing hardware.
It is, but the metabolic bill for running it is staggering.
It's unbelievable.
Consider the sheer energy demand. The modern human brain, it only accounts for about 2% of our total body mass.
Just 2%.
Yet it demands between 20 to 25% of our total resting metabolic energy.
Wow. A quarter of all our energy just to keep the lights on upstairs.
Exactly. And to put that into perspective, if you look at our closest primate relatives, their brains only consume 8 to 10% of their resting energy.
So that's a huge difference.
It's a massive difference. That surplus energy, that 15% gap, had to come from somewhere. And it was a non-trivial evolutionary challenge to find a fuel source dense enough to consistently pay that bill.
And this very challenge gave rise to what has become a foundational concept in human evolution, the expensive tissue hypothesis.
That's the one. Proposed by Aiello and Wheeler back in 1995.
And it really is the key, isn't it?
It's the key to understanding how we afforded this massive cognitive expansion without, just spending all day eating like a gorilla has to.
Right.
The theory posits that the massive metabolic energy required for that brain growth was financed by shrinking the size of another extremely expensive, metabolically demanding organ.
A trade-off.
A direct trade-off. And that organ was the gut, the digestive tract.
So we traded gut for brain.
Essentially, yes. Our early hominin ancestors likely had these large colons, very lengthy digestive systems, similar to other primates.
What were they for?
They needed them to ferment and extract nutrients from huge amounts of low-quality, tough plant fiber. That fermentation process is slow, it's bulky, and it's metabolically very, very expensive.
So we swapped a slow, bulky processing plant, this massive, high-fiber gut, for a faster, smaller, more streamlined digestive system.
Exactly.
But that only works if you start eating food that is, well, much easier to digest and far more nutrient-dense.
Precisely. We optimize for energy density, and the most energy-dense, highly digestible food source available in that environment was animal products. Meat, fat, organs. They provide far more usable energy per gram than the low-quality plants our primate ancestors were eating. This dietary shift allowed for an immediate energy surplus that could then be redirected entirely to fuel that rapid, sustained brain growth.
And I think a lot of people assume this shift started with, big game hunting.
Yeah.
Men with spear.
Right, the classic image.
But the sources suggest the most significant nutritional kickstart happened much, much earlier. Potentially as far back as 4 million years ago, with what they call the fat hypothesis.
This is where the story gets really compelling.
Yeah.
And maybe a bit counterintuitive.
Okay.
Imagine the environment 4 million years ago. Our ancestors were not the dominant hunters, not even close. They were competing with massive carnivores.
So they were scavengers.
Scavenging was the name of the game. And early hominins developed this major competitive advantage by targeting what everyone else left behind, the skeletal remains of kills.
Specifically, they developed a taste for fat by cracking open the long bones for marrow.
Correct. Bone marrow is incredibly rich in fat. It's extremely calorie-dense.
And crucially, it was safe.
It was sealed inside the long bones, protected from contamination, and often protected from other scavengers simply because it was so hard to get to.
You needed a tool.
You needed a tool. Early hominins, using possibly the earliest Oldowan stone tools, were able to access this resource. This was essentially a perfectly packaged, high-energy, high-fat food reserve in an otherwise pretty lean landscape.
A consistent energy source.
A consistent, energy-rich input. And that's what provided the crucial nutritional stability required for that sustained cognitive expansion.
And this is why, even today, our palates are so strongly wired to crave fat.
It's a deep evolutionary drive.
And it wasn't just raw calories, was it? Our sources make it very clear that the brain, this organ we're now so concerned about protecting from cognitive decline as we age, it needs specific, complex building blocks that animal products provide directly.
The dependence is absolute and profound. The brain's structure is built heavily on lipids, on fats, specifically essential fatty acids, most notably docosahexaenoic acid, or DHA, and arachidonic acid.
And you can't get those easily from plants.
Well, plants provide precursors, but the human body is incredibly inefficient at converting them. Animal sources, especially fat, brains, and fish, they provide these essential fatty acids in the finished, biologically usable form.
So if you want to maintain peak cognitive health, these are, non-negotiable building blocks.
They really are. And beyond the structural fats, there's the reliance on specific vitamins.
Okay, like what?
Animal products supply key micronutrients that are essential for metabolism, nerve health, and energy production. We're talking about nicotinamide, that's vitamin B3 and vitamin B12.
And humans became totally dependent on these.
Evolutionarily dependent, yes. B12, for instance, is virtually non-existent in plant-based food sources. A deficiency today leads to severe neurological problems.
And B3.
Nicotinamide has been specifically cited as a key brain trophic element.
Meaning it nourishes the brain.
It nourishes the brain, supporting its rapid metabolism and neurological development. So if we connect this to the bigger picture, our entire metabolic system is fundamentally adapted to a significant consumption of these animal-sourced foods. It's what shifted us away from the high-fiber or low-density diet of our primate past.
So the message for the listener who's focused on longevity and mental sharpness is pretty clear. The diet that built our brain requires high-quality, dense nutrition, protein, and fats to maintain it today.
Exactly.
And you can actually see the consequence of this dietary shift written on the anatomy of ancient humans, specifically in this process of gracilization.
That's the physical manifestation of what you could call externalized digestion.
What do you mean by that?
The reliance on easily digestible, nutrient-dense foods, first through scavenging, then using stone-cutting tools, and later, critically, with cooking and fire, it dramatically reduced the mechanical necessity for heavy, prolonged chewing.
You just don't need to grind away for hours.
If you no longer spend hours every day grinding tough, fibrous plants, your chewing apparatus, well, it becomes redundant.
And that's what leads to the gracilization of the human skull.
Precisely. We see the development of smaller teeth, a reduction in jaw size, and weaker chewing muscles compared to our predecessors.
So tools and fire essentially allowed us to pre-digest our food.
They softened it before it even entered the mouth. This change was critical. It was a massive evolutionary trade-off. In exchange for a huge, high-powered brain, we accepted a physically weaker jaw and a shorter digestive system.
And that locked us in.
It locked us into a trajectory where the quality of food became absolutely paramount over sheer quantity or toughness.
So lesson one from our deep past.
Sure.
Our sophisticated systems, especially the brain, are expensive. They require the nutrient density of animal-sourced food. That's the pattern that defined the rise of our genus for millions of years.
Millions of years.
We've established that the engine of human evolution was running on this high-quality, dense animal-sourced fuel. It stabilized the hunter-gatherer template. But then, only about 12,000 years ago, a blink of an eye in evolutionary time humanity made the second great pivot. The adoption of agriculture. The Neolithic revolution.
Right.
And when we talk about civilization, settled life, the population boom, this is often seen as the greatest moment in human history.
And from a demographic and civilizational perspective, it absolutely was one of humanity's greatest achievements. There's no question.
But our ancestors made a trade-off.
A necessary one from their perspective. They gained massive, rapid population increase and societal stability.
All enabled by the control, storage, and predictability of domesticated plants and animals.
Right. They were choosing cheap, storable calories and population security over individual physical robustness.
But the bioarchaeological evidence, the analysis of thousands and thousands of ancient skeletons, it tells a much more disturbing story for the individual human.
It really does.
It suggests this transition led to a dramatic, rapid decline in individual well-being and health. One source called it a catastrophic event from a biological standpoint.
And that is the great Neolithic paradox. Civilization flourished while the health markers for individuals just collapsed.
What was the core problem?
The core problem was a nutritional poverty disguised as caloric richness.
Tell you more about that.
People gained massive quantities of calories from staple crops, wheat, barley, maize, rice. But because they relied so heavily on a very limited number of starchy crops, they suffered from chronic deficiencies.
They had full bellies but were malnourished.
Exactly. And furthermore, that dependency on just one or two crops made entire communities vulnerable to mass starvation if that single crop failed due to drought or blight.
So the most compelling evidence for this health collapse is literally visible in the skeletal remains of these early farming communities.
The evidence is undeniable.
Especially when we look at signs of childhood stress and malnutrition.
We see widespread distress. The most obvious sign is a highly significant reduction in stature in early farming communities compared to the hunter-gatherers who came before them.
And the numbers in our sources are staggering. I mean, early Neolithic males in Europe showed an average height reduction of over 10 centimeters.
That's almost 4 inches.
That's a huge shift in just a few thousand years, from a robust 174 or 183 centimeters down to 162.5, 164.5.
And that reduction is not some random genetic change. It signals chronic, severe malnutrition and disease during the critical growth periods of childhood.
It's a visible sign that the new agricultural diet just wasn't providing the building blocks for optimal growth.
It wasn't. But we see even more direct signs of this stress preserved in the bones themselves.
You're talking about the markers for anemia and mineral deficiency.
Exactly. We frequently see these specific porous lesions on the skull. On the top of the skull, it's known as porotic hyperostosis, and in the eye orbits, it's called cribro-orbitalia.
Now, those are technical terms. If you're listening and you hear those, what's the simple explanation? What do they mean?
They mean the bones look spongy or sieve-like in those places, and these lesions reflect bone marrow hyperactivity. When the body is severely anemic, meaning it lacks sufficient oxygen-carrying red blood cells, the bone marrow goes into overdrive, desperately trying to produce more.
So it's an emergency response.
It is. And in children, this overgrowth literally pushes against the thin bone plates of the skull and eye orbits, creating that porous texture. It's the body fighting a losing battle against deficiency.
And the deficiency is often linked directly to the new diet of the farmer.
Precisely. The reliance on grains introduced what we call anti-nutrients into the diet. We really should take a moment to discuss phytates.
Okay, what are phytates?
Grains contain phytic acid, or phytates. These are compounds designed by the plant to store phosphorus.
Which sounds fine.
Except when humans consume them, phytates bind very tightly to essential minerals like iron, zinc, and calcium in the gut, and they prevent their absorption.
So the Neolithic diet was a double whammy.
It was.
It was low in the best kind of iron, the heme iron from meat. And the staples they did eat actively blocked the absorption of the minimal minerals they consumed. You've got it. This created widespread iron deficiency anemia, which is what led to that visible porotic hyperostosis we were just talking about.
And there are other markers too, right? On the teeth.
Yes. The bones also show linear enamel hypoplasia. These are transverse lines on the teeth, and they're like growth rings on a tree.
What do they signify?
Each line marks a distinct period of severe childhood physiological stress, a bad illness, or a seasonal famine that temporarily halted the formation of tooth enamel.
Wow.
Hunter-gatherers had these perfect, smooth teeth. The teeth of early farmers show interruption after interruption after interruption.
So the very food that enabled civilization was, biologically speaking, sabotaging the growth, the density, and the nutrient absorption of the people eating it.
Yes.
Which brings us directly to the collapse of oral and bone health, and these are areas of profound concern for seniors today, thinking about quality of life and mobility.
This is perhaps the most visible indicator of the Neolithic shift.
Yeah.
The prevalence of dental decay or cavities, it just exploded.
What were the numbers like? Think of the hunter-gatherers. Tough, fibrous diets, rarely any sugar, and almost no cavities. Less than 1.3% prevalence in some of those upper Paleolithic populations.
Amazing.
Once farming took hold, especially with the high consumption of fermentable carbohydrates and these sticky, starchy crops like corn, the mouth environment changed drastically. Bacteria thrived. And the prevalence of decay shot up to over 10% almost immediately.
And the structure of the jaw itself suffered as well, continuing that gracilization trend we saw, starting with tool use.
That's right. As you mentioned earlier, tools and fire started the process of reducing jaw size. Well, the softer, cooked agricultural diet further reduced masticatory forces, the actual mechanical work the jaw has to perform.
Less work for the jaw to do.
Much less. And this resulted in smaller, lighter, weaker jaw structures.
But the teeth didn't get the memo, right? Which results in the problem we still deal with today, misalignment.
That's a crucial point of evolutionary mismatch. Tooth size is highly conserved, it's genetically programmed, and evolves very, very slowly.
But jaw structure isn't.
Jaw structure is highly environmentally plastic. It responds quickly to the mechanical load placed upon it. So when the jaw shrank because of the soft food, the teeth remained large, leading directly to dental crowding, malocclusion, impacted wisdom teeth, and all the common orthodontic issues we associate with modern life. This is the structural legacy of the Neolithic diet.
Let's pivot to bone density. This is a massive concern for American seniors worried about fall risk, broken hips, and osteoporosis.
Yes.
Our sources noted that hunter-gatherer bones were incredibly robust and dense. They were adapted to high mobility walking, some estimate 20,000 steps per day, and intense, varied physical activity.
And following the sedentary shift of agriculture, bone mass decreased by approximately 20% in farming populations.
20%.
Within just 6,000 years. This wasn't a slow decline. It was a rapid, functional loss of strength.
And they can see this inside the bone.
Researchers who analyzed the internal structure of load-bearing bones found that the strong, structurally sound, plate-like internal components of the hunter-gatherer skeleton
transitioned to thinner, weaker, pin-like structures in the farmers. The bone was essentially being hollowed out from the inside.
So the loss of skeletal strength wasn't just a calcium deficiency problem.
No.
Because if it was, the farmers, who were often drinking milk from their domesticated animals, should have been fine. It was fundamentally a lack of mechanical stress.
It was an activity deficit. And this confirms a vital lesson for today. Bone is dynamic tissue. It responds to high amounts of physical activity and mechanical stress by increasing in mass and strengthening its internal architecture.
Use it or lose it.
Literally. If you adopt a sedentary lifestyle, if you stop applying the dynamic forces needed for prolonged travel, running, heavy lifting, the skeleton stops maintaining that strength.
And this functional weakness is the direct evolutionary precursor to modern conditions like osteopenia and osteoporosis. It is. For the listener striving to age well and maintain independence, the archaeological record confirms that strength and density are tied directly to the dynamic demands you place on your skeleton. You have to earn your bone density every single day.
And before we move on, it's also worth acknowledging that agriculture didn't just hurt the individual biologically.
Yeah.
It created new forms of inequality.
It absolutely did. The ability to store food created surpluses, which in turn created entrenched class divisions. We see this evidence clearly in the skeletal record.
For example.
Skeletons recovered from elite Greek tombs, for instance, showed that the wealthy were significantly taller and had dramatically better dental health, like 1 cavity versus 6, compared to the commoners who subsisted entirely on poor quality staple crops.
The wealth differential literally translated into a nutritional differential.
It's written right on their skeletons.
And the health burden sometimes fell unequally on gender lines as well.
In some regions of early farming, we see evidence that gender inequality increased, freed from the constraints of nomadic movement and with agricultural systems demanding more labor.
Right.
Farming women often had more frequent pregnancies, which dramatically drained their mineral reserves and caloric capacity.
And the evidence shows this.
Studies in Central and Southeast Europe, for example, showed women experiencing greater decreases in stature and generally poorer health outcomes over time compared to men in the same communities.
So it was a combination of things.
The combined stress of increased physical labor, constant pregnancy, and nutritional deficiencies compounded these negative health outcomes for women during this period.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting and fundamentally challenges a lot of our modern health assumptions. We've established that the shift to farming led to smaller, sicker people with weaker bones. But what about the leading cause of death today? Cardiovascular disease. We're taught to assume atherosclerosis is a purely modern affliction caused by smoking, fast food, high cholesterol.
That assumption that cardiovascular disease, or CVD, is solely a product of the last 100 years. That is precisely what a massive investigation called the Horus Study comprehensively dismantled.
This was an incredible effort.
Unprecedented. It involved CT scans of 137 mummies spanning 4,000 years from 4 widely different continents and populations.
And we're talking about ancient Egyptians from the Nile, ancient Peruvians from the Andes, ancestral Pueblans from North America, and the Unaingan from the Aleutian Islands.
Totally different diets, climates, social structures, a perfect cross-section.
And despite all those differences, what was the universal finding?
They found definite or probable atherosclerosis, that's calcified plaque in the artery walls, in 34% of all the mummies they examined.
A third of them.
A third of them. This suggests that this disease is not an exclusive curse of modernity. It's been a burden on the human circulation for at least 4 millennia.
And they found specific cases of coronary heart disease, right, in the heart itself.
Yes. The earliest known case was an Egyptian princess, Ahmose Mariat Eman, living around 1580 BC.
And our sources confirmed this plaque wasn't just in, large peripheral vessels. About 7% of the mummies had obstructions in the actual heart arteries, and 14% had blockages in the carotid arteries.
Which are the modern leading causes of heart attack and stroke.
Exactly.
And what's most telling is that the single most predictive factor for atherosclerosis in these ancient people was advancing age, just as it is today.
So the older you got, the more likely you were to have it.
That's right. Mummies with the disease had an average age of death of 43 years compared to 32 years for those without it. This implies that the disease progressed throughout their lives, accumulating damage year over year, even though their average lifespan was much shorter than ours.
Now, let's get into the dietary paradox that's embedded in the Horus data, because this has huge implications for current health debates, especially for anyone listening who's trying to figure out the right food path for heart health.
This is the data that forces us to rethink everything.
Yeah.
You have these ancient populations with wildly different primary diets, yet they all show a significant prevalence of the disease.
Okay, give us an example.
Take the Unaingan from the cold Aleutian Islands. They had a 60% prevalence of atherosclerosis.
60%. And what was their diet?
Intensely high fat, primarily marine mammals, seals, and fish.
Okay, so that's one end of the spectrum.
Now contrast that with the ancient Egyptians. 38% prevalence. Their staple diet was grain-based, bread, beer, fruit, and vegetables, with limited meat, often only consumed by the elite.
So you have high-fat seafood eaters and high-carb grain eaters.
Both suffering from significant calcified arteries. If the type of fat or carbohydrate were the only overriding factor, you would expect those numbers to be radically different, maybe 60% in one group and 5% in the other.
But they weren't.
The fact that both had high rates suggests there was a common, non-traditional driver of arterial damage at play.
But wait a minute. If we go back to our first section, we established that high-quality animal foods were essential for human development. Yet, In Egypt, the elite pharaohs Ramesses II and III, who had access to richer diets with more saturated fat from cattle and geese, they were often more susceptible to CVD than the commoners. Doesn't that suggest a problem with meat and fat consumption?
That's a really important challenge to address. And it suggests that the problem isn't inherent to all animal-sourced food, but maybe inherent to the lifestyle and overconsumption that high status often afforded.
So it's not the food itself, but the context.
The elite were sedentary. They ate excessively, often consuming large amounts of rich foods far beyond what was required for survival, and they likely faced the same inflammatory burdens as everyone else.
So when you compare ancient Egyptians to modern Egyptians,
Excluding modern patients over 60, the incidence and severity of atherosclerosis were surprisingly similar. This implies that the traditional modern risk factors like smoking, high blood pressure, and extreme Western-style processed diets do not fully explain the ancient prevalence.
this raises a huge question, and it's directly relevant to modern preventative medicine. If it wasn't always just cholesterol or saturated fat, what was the underlying mechanism causing this inflammation and arterial damage in antiquity?
The focus shifts dramatically. It shifts to non-traditional risk factors, specifically chronic systemic inflammation.
Right.
Inflammation is now considered the key driver in the genesis of CVD, and ancient life, regardless of diet, was filled with chronic inflammatory triggers that kept the body's immune system constantly activated.
Okay, so what were those triggers that were common to all these disparate ancient cultures?
Two primary suspects are identified in the sources. First, inhalation. Persistent smoke inhalation from indoor cooking fires was ubiquitous. These ancient populations lived in low-ceiling houses, subterranean homes, or igloos. They were burning wood, peat, or dung indoors for cooking and heating.
And researchers suggest this constant, low-level smoke exposure acted like modern smoking.
As a significant atherogenic factor, yes, constantly irritating the lungs and triggering a systemic inflammatory response.
So whether the ancient trigger was wood smoke or the modern trigger is cigarette smoke, the vascular system reads it as a chronic threat and responds with inflammation.
Exactly. The body doesn't care if the threat is natural or manufactured, it just sees a persistent irritant.
And what was the second major suspect?
Infection and parasites. Ancient life was unhygienic by our standards. Chronic infection, parasites, and a constant high pathogen load from poor sanitation, contaminated water, and living closely with domesticated livestock. All of this kept the immune system constantly activated.
So constant low-grade war inside the body.
A sustained immune response, chronic inflammation. And that damages the delicate lining of the blood vessels, the endothelium, over time. And that damage is the precursor for plaque formation.
That truly reframes the narrative of heart disease completely. It suggests that regardless of whether you're eating a high-fat marine diet or a high-carb grain diet, if you have this chronic immunological burden and a sedentary life, your arteries are going to calcify.
And that's why the study of the living Simini population is so crucial.
Okay, who are the Simini?
They are hunter-gatherer farmers in the Bolivian Amazon, and they offer a vital counterpoint to the mummies.
A living example.
A living example. They live into their 80s and 90s, and they exhibit arguably the healthiest hearts described anywhere on the planet. Many octogenarians are completely free of coronary calcification.
So what is it about their lifestyle that provides such remarkable cardiovascular protection?
They maintain an intensely ancestral lifestyle that directly addresses those three evolutionary mismatches we've been talking about.
Okay, what are they?
First, they walk up to 20,000 steps every day, maintaining the dynamic movement pattern of our ancestors.
Constant motion.
Second, their diet is wild meat, fish, and unprocessed carbohydrates like plantains and rice. It's minimally processed, not refined sugar.
And third.
Third, they live in open huts, and despite their environment, they maintain very low risk factors. Their average cholesterol is below 70, their blood pressure is around a 115, their BMI is 24. They've managed to minimize the primary drivers of inflammation, inactivity, processed foods, and high-level pathogen exposure.
So the Sagami proved that while atherosclerosis is linked to the process of aging, it is absolutely not inevitable.
Not at all. It can be significantly mitigated by maintaining these key ancestral lifestyle patterns, emphasizing high activity, and minimizing the triggers for chronic systemic inflammation.
So we've traced this massive 4-million-year arc.
We have.
The high-quality diet that built our brain. The catastrophic health decline caused by the nutritional poverty and sedentism of the farming revolution. And this surprising realization that heart disease is an ancient affliction, driven heavily by inflammation and inactivity, regardless of diet.
That's the story.
So what does this all mean for the listener who's focused on longevity, stronger bones, maintaining vitality as they age? How do we apply this evolutionary blueprint to thrive in later life?
I think we have to focus entirely on deliberately counteracting that evolutionary mismatch that has persisted since the Neolithic period.
Yeah.
The archaeological and evolutionary data give us three clear, interlinked pathways for optimizing health and promoting longevity. And they resonate deeply with the needs of the aging American population.
And those are great.
Quality nutrition, dynamic movement, and inflammation control.
Let's start with diet, but through the lens of modern science. If our evolutionary history favors nutrient density and low processing, what does the evidence say about the Paleolithic diet, which is the modern interpretation of that pattern?
Well, our sources included a systematic review and meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials, RCTs, examining the effects of a paleo diet on cardiovascular disease risk factors.
Headline results.
More than compelling. They're clinically significant. The Paleolithic diet, as defined here, is strict. You're consuming lean meat, fish, vegetables, fruits, and nuts, while actively avoiding grains, dairy, processed foods, and any added sugar or salt.
So what did the review find?
It found significant beneficial effects on key CVD risk factors, the very markers that are critical for long-term health and vitality.
Can you break down those specific improvements? I know a lot of our listeners are tracking these health markers very closely.
Certainly. When comparing the paleo diet to standard Western diets, it showed a robust weight reduction with a weighted mean difference of nearly minus 1.7 kilograms.
Which is pretty significant.
It is. And crucially, for those concerned about metabolic health, there was a reduction in waist circumference of about minus 2.7 centimeters. That indicates a loss of dangerous visceral fat around the organs.
And what about the traditional markers used to predict stroke and heart attack, risk, blood pressure, and cholesterol?
Major improvements across both. Systolic blood pressure was reduced by almost 5 millimeter Hg, and diastolic by over 3 millimeter Hg.
And for a 65-year-old listener, a sustained 5-point reduction in systolic pressure, that translates into a substantially lower risk of fatal stroke and coronary events over their lifetime.
These are clinical-level improvements achieved purely through dietary change. That level of reduction is comparable to some anti-hypertensive medications.
Incredible. And the lipid profile.
Improved across the board. Reduced total cholesterol, reduced LDL cholesterol, the bad cholesterol, and reduced triglycerides. And crucially, it also resulted in an increase in HDL cholesterol, the good cholesterol, which is very difficult to achieve.
And what about inflammation? That seems to be the key.
Most compellingly, linking back to the Horus study, the paleo diet significantly reduced C-reactive protein, or CRP.
And CRP is that key marker for chronic inflammation we discussed. How significant was that reduction?
The reduction in CRP was about minus 0.48 milligrams per liter. Now that may sound small, but CRP reduction is a major objective in preventative medicine.
So what this data suggests is that returning to an ancestral nutritional pattern actively reverses the underlying inflammatory process that the archaeological record shows has driven heart disease for thousands of years.
It does. The data clearly shows we can counteract the modern mismatch.
So the first takeaway is about quality nutrition, which leads directly to the second, which is overcoming the physical decline that was initiated by the Neolithic shift.
This is perhaps the most urgent lesson for anyone worried about fall risk, broken bones, and maintaining mobility.
Go on.
The profound loss of bone density and skeletal strength, that gracilization, it began with the shift away from the dynamic, high-impact activities of hunter-gatherers. Our skeletons are genetically adapted to dynamic physical stress and load.
And the sedentary habits common today are just accelerating that trend.
They're accelerating the bone fragility trend that began when we settled down 12,000 years ago.
So for the listener concerned about falls and osteoporosis, the takeaway isn't just taking a calcium supplement.
No.
It's about load-bearing exercise that structurally challenges the bone, just like a hunter-gatherer carrying a carcass or walking 10 miles.
Absolutely. The bone structure transitions from those strong plate-like supports to weaker pin-like supports when the mechanical stimulus is removed.
So you have to keep sending the signal.
You have to send a clear, demanding signal to your bones that they are needed. Otherwise, the body will begin to dismantle them, following that ancient evolutionary script.
Let's synthesize all of this then into the 3 key evolutionary takeaways for maximizing health span and longevity.
First, prioritize high-quality nutrients. You have to actively choose nutrient density over cheap bulk calories.
Which mean?
It means focusing on the building blocks that fueled our brain's expansion. Protein and high-quality fats from animal-sourced foods, meat, fish, maybe even organ meats that are rich in DHA, B12, nicotinamide, and heme iron.
Nutrients that are essential for maintaining those high-cost systems, especially cognitive function and neurological health.
And for avoiding the mineral deficiencies that plagued our Neolithic ancestors.
Okay, what's number 2?
Second, move dynamically and consistently. We must actively fight the sedentism that defined the health decline of early farmers. This isn't about hitting a random step count on your watch.
It's about restoring functional strength and dynamic movement.
Exactly. Physical activity must be integrated not just for burning calories, but specifically for optimizing cardiovascular health and, critically, for maintaining the functional strength of the skeleton.
The Semaine model shows us that this high level of consistent activity can literally prevent the calcification of arteries even into old age.
It can. And third, minimize chronic inflammation.
A big one.
The archaeological record, from the mummies to the Semaine, teaches us that chronic inflammation accelerates heart disease regardless of your diet type. While the ancient causes were smoke and parasites, modern chronic inflammation stems from the excessive consumption of processed foods, refined sugar, and potentially harmful industrial seed oils, elements that were non-existent in ancestral diets.
So controlling this through a high-quality diet and avoiding modern inflammatory triggers is paramount for heart health and overall vitality.
The reduction of CRP we saw in the paleo diet studies just underscores this priority for longevity.
That's a powerful summary. We've gone from 4 million years of evolution through the rise and fall of ancient health markers to 3 actionable, science-backed priorities for thriving in later life.
And the history is absolutely clear. Our biggest biological setbacks, from shrinking brains and weaker bones to the ancient prevalence of heart disease, they often correlate with moving away from the rigorous, nutrient-dense lifestyle that made us human.
So if optimizing your health means leveraging your own evolutionary blueprint, perhaps the most impactful step you can take today is to not just change what you eat, but to restore the intense and dynamic physical demands our bodies are genetically programmed to handle, just as the Semaine still do today. That dedication to dynamic movement and nutrient density is the evolutionary key to a stronger heart, denser bones, and better cognitive function for years to come.